Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Today we're going to be going over the Herald of the Sun hero talent trees. This is for Holy and Ret Paladin, and then we'll also reference these in comparison to the Lightsmith tree that is for Holy and Prot. Going into it, again, this tree is going to be shared between Holy and Ret, and it's going to have an emphasis on sunspots. And it's also, for Holy Paladin, it's going to have a really big emphasis on Holy Prism instead of Light's Hammer. So Holy Prism causes your next two Holy Power spending abilities to create a sunspot on your target, dealing radiant damage or healing over 8 seconds. For Ret Pally, instead, the activator is going to be Wake of Ashes, again, causing your next two Holy Power spending abilities to create a sunspot on your target, dealing radiant damage or healing over 8 seconds. Both specializations have 10% of the sunspot's damage and healing radiating to nearby allies or enemies reduced beyond 5 targets. This is kind of just this like pulsing AoE effect that I would expect to be able to see from marking those targets with the sunspots. And again, they're casting on the player. Interestingly enough, we are getting some ability transformation, which is something that I think Venruki had really talked about in his video about hero talents, where Eternal Flame is replacing Word of Glory. Eternal Flame is an old talent that I love playing with in Mist Pandaria. And keep in mind, Holy and Ret are both getting these, where you are healing an ally immediately and over an additional 20 seconds. Back in the day, each tick of the hot was also transferring as well to your beacon. So you could put up like a whole bunch of little hots onto a bunch of players and just radiate tons of healing into your allies that way and into your beacons. The healing is also increased by 25% when casting yourself. Morning Star, every 5 seconds, your next sunspot's damage or healing is increased by 5%, stacking up to 10 times, and it stacks twice as fast while you're out of combat, so you're always going to have a bit more of like a burst heal or burst damage ability when you're walking into like a new trash pack, which could be pretty good for Holy Pally to have like an instant push up in terms of healing whenever somebody takes like unexpected damage or something. Gleaming Ray is the other choice node. While a sunspot is active, your Holy Power spenders deal 10% increased additional damage or healing. Luminosity over here on the right side, your critical strike chance of Hammer of Wrath and Divine Storm is increased by 10%. Whoopsie, they swapped it with Holy and Ret. Where for Holy Pally, your crit strike chance of Holy Shock and Light of Dawn is increased by 10%. There's going to be a few different references to Light of Dawn here because it seems like they want to make sure that just because you're taking Eternal Flame, that you're not hitting it all the time no matter what. One of these is Sunseer, where Holy Shock and Light of Dawn crit strike causes the target to burn for additional radiant damage or over 4 seconds, or be healed for over 4 seconds. Hammer of Wrath and Divine Storm crit strikes cause the target to burn for additional radiant damage over 4 seconds. Sunspot's duration is increased by 2 seconds, and Eternal Flame's duration is increased by 3 seconds. This competes with Lingering Radiance, where Sunspots leave an Eternal Flame for 12 seconds on allies, or a Greater Judgment on enemies when they expire or are extended. And so, bring us back up to here. Sunspots are a result of your Holy Power spenders after you cast Holy Prism on this one. That also means, how is Light of Dawn going to apply sunspots if Light of Dawn doesn't really have a direct target to it? And if you're using a Holy Power spender on Eternal Flame while you have Eternal Sun up, does that mean you're having 2 Eternal Flames onto the target, and so you're having like an extra powerful stacking hot onto them? So how they determine Light of Dawn targeting will be pretty interesting. Lingering Radiance was the one that we just talked about. Sorry. Illumine. Sunspots reduce the movement speed of enemies by 50% and increase the movement speed of all allies by 20%. I think that one's pretty cool, but I really like this one called Will of the Dawn, where movement speed is increased by 5% while above 80% health. When your health is brought below 35%, your movement speed is increased by 40% for 5 seconds with a 60-second cooldown. So it's kind of like a double time type mechanic. It's like in Bangalore's double time mechanic in Apex, where if like you drop low or you're targeted or whatever, then you get to speed up. I actually think that one's super sick for Holy Pallies. Aurora, after you cast Holy Prism, gain Divine Purpose, so you get a free Holy Power spender on hand. Solar Grace, your haste is increased by 4% for 12 seconds each time you apply a sunspot. Multiple stacks may overlap. So this one will be really crazy to see just how many stacks you're going to be able to build up, because as you'll see in Sun's Avatar in a second, you're going to build up a lot of these over the course of it. Second Sunrise, Holy Shock and Light of Dawn have a 15% chance to cast again at 30% effectiveness. I'm kind of curious if that means you get more holy power on hand. Hammer of Wrath and Divine Storm have a 15% chance to cast again at 30% effectiveness. And finally, Sun's Avatar. During Avenging Wrath, you become linked to your sunspots, causing radiant damage to enemies or healing to allies that pass through the beams. Reduced beyond 5 targets. This just sounds insane to me, because you're just shooting out beams from your body to connect with the other players in like a verdant tether type situation. In fact, I'll go see if I can find verdant tether just to like highlight it for you guys if you haven't seen this before. But they're really bright and noticeable. But if you're gonna have that item also be impacting other players and their POV, that's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be very, very interesting. I can't find a good image of it right now. This is like a really, really poor image. But Verdant Tether is basically a flat green line that would appear between 2 players on hand. If you're having like bright white lights jumping between you and 6 or 7 other targets, that's a lot of like bloat on somebody's screen to be able to see, especially if somebody was going to stand in it to receive more healing. That's just really nasty to deal with. It's also not so much healing that you could reasonably rely upon it. And what I've kind of seen with a lot of this tree thus far with sunspots is there's like a lot of little heals that kind of remind me of like all the different modifiers that Holy Shock has, where you're having little heals coming from your tier set, little heals coming from Overheal with Glimmer, little heals coming from Glimmer itself, that is all kind of tied into your abilities. And so the more that you have these stacking modifier buffs, or the more that you're having lots of like small 1% heals or something like that here and there, the less healing that you're getting directly from like Holy Shock or Word of Glory or Light of Dawn or whatever. It sort of erodes the base healing that you have of those other spells. So that's kind of my concern, is it's no bloat whatsoever, which is nice. In fact, it's really, really cool that they're transforming abilities instead of adding new abilities to the table. I like that a lot. But then it's more like having to remember some of the side interactions for how things work. I'm also kind of curious about how they're having Lingering Radiance working. That seems a little bit unknown to me, because sunspots and having your Light of Dawn, how that's supposed to work, seems a little bit odd to me. Otherwise, I think this tree is actually really cool, and it's a massive step up from Lightsmith Paladin, which if you hadn't seen before, basically it centers around holy armaments, where you're willing the light to coalesce and become manifest at a location. So you'd have to find a good way to target players, but it seems like it's going to be more of like an actual like reticule on the ground that you would be firing at, and you want to be casting it on other players because Solidarity makes it give you the buff as well. And then you can have a bulwark where you're gaining an absorb shield for max health, or a weapon where you're having spells and abilities have a chance to deal additional damage or healing. So this Lightsmith tree was all about like adding another button to the table, buffing your allies while also buffing yourself to be able to cast additional healing and everything on hand. Your wings would be proccing additional weapons, dealing additional healing as a result. I feel like this leans a lot more into like prop pally. It also leans a little bit more into caster pally with things like Valiance, where consuming your infusion extends the duration of the active armaments. And so you'd want to be consuming all the infusions you could to extend the duration of your armaments to give your allies the biggest buffs that you possibly could all the time. Whereas Lightsmith Paladin seems a lot more freeing, where you're able to just use your spenders as you will. But I'm also a little bit concerned as to whether or not this Sunspot kind of playstyle is also going to make it so that some of your spells in like Holy Shock and Word of Glory, or even all your spenders really, are they going to be weaker because some of the healing of the pie, of the total overall healing pie that you might see, is getting split up into too many chunks? Because when Holy Pally might have like Holy Shock, Word of Glory / Light of Dawn, and honestly, in some cases, that was kind of it for the pie, right? You would really just have like maybe 3 slices or something like that for Holy Pally. But the more that you're segmenting it and breaking it up into other chunks, then the less healing that you're going to see directly for hitting Holy Shock. The less of your ability hitting is going to feel like it's actually satisfying and actually hits really hard. And that's what I'm kind of worried about with these hero talents in a lot of cases, is having this sort of like dilution of all of your baseline abilities. I will say it'd be a great thing if it gets rid of Caster Paladin, or at least segments Caster Paladin off into like Lightsmith, because I think a lot of Holy Pallies don't necessarily like playing a really heavy caster build, especially when they're relegated to being in melee all the time. So I think Sunspot and like Herald of the Sun looks to be a positive in that regard. That being said, I think a lot of Holy Pally players want their Holy Shocks to hit hard, want their spenders to actually feel valuable, not like they're ooming them, things along those lines. Holy Pally still doesn't really have like a mana dump on hand, and so when you're just kind of hitting your baseline abilities and you're going as a result, it feels tremendously poor. And I don't know if that really is fixed by these hero talents at all. So big +1 for me for not adding more bloat, for transforming abilities, and not really having too much that you would need like a weak aura to track. I think those things are really nice. You would basically hit your Holy Prism, and then your spenders would like light up on like your action bars if you weren't using like a lot of add-ons or something like that. And then your next, and after you use one spender, then okay, cool, you'd still have your next spender be lit up to show that something is going to happen as a result. And those things are really, really good. Having additional stack trackers for like the old version, I know they're reverting Oracle, but like the old Oracle Priest had like, hey, after you're having Prayer of Mending and Shields getting consumed, you get a stacking buff, and once it reaches 150, you get an extra proc, and it's like, we shouldn't want to actually have to be tracking buffs like that. So this, I think, is definitely the better of the two Holy Pally trees, and I think it's a lot more interesting. I am just worried that it seems like there's a bit more dilution for the entire like tree, and the more little like modifiers and like side buffs and side effects that casting things like Holy Shock or casting your spenders have, the weaker it also makes your spenders feel as a result. And so when you're casting this ability, you're like, oh yes, I'm putting out my spender onto my target, I'm putting out the Eternal Flame, and I'm also putting out a longer Eternal Flame, and also having this Sunspot, which is radiating healing to allies. And when you spread out the output in a variety of areas, that's also where it kind of dilutes the entire pool of your abilities. And that's what I'm a little bit worried about. But otherwise, this is a lot cooler than the Holy Pally's had before, and it's kind of my favorite hero talent thus far for healers in general. So +1 for that. Let me know what you guys think as well. And thanks for checking out our hero review for Herald of the Sun.